Welcome back to another journey through the quieter corridors of history. Tonight, we're stepping into the world of ancient Rome, but not the Rome of gladiators and conquests that keeps you awake with excitement. Instead, we're exploring something far more intimate and, frankly, far more unsettling: what it meant to be sick in the Roman Empire. Picture yourself settling into the comfort of your modern bed, perhaps with a glass of water nearby, knowing that if you felt unwell tomorrow, you could visit a doctor who would wash their hands, use sterile instruments, prescribe medications tested for safety and efficacy. Hold on to that comfort, cause we're about to explore a time when medicine was a blend of genuine observation, quaint, desperate hope, and practices that would make your skin crawl in the ancient Roman world. Falling ill wasn't just about battling disease, it was about surrendering yourself to treatments that often seemed designed to test your will to live. The physician's touch wasn't necessarily healing, it was often painful, invasive, and guided by theories that mixed careful observation with superstition, astrology, and a profound misunderstanding of how the human body actually worked. Imagine the dread that would settle in your stomach as you realized that persistent fever wasn't going away on its own. In Rome, calling for a physician meant opening your door to a figure who carried bronze instruments that had never been properly cleaned, who would diagnose your ailments by the smell of your sweat, and who genuinely believed that the position of the stars at your birth determined the best treatment for your suffering. The very act of seeking medical help was an act of faith, not in science as we understand it, but in a complex system that blended careful observation with practices that seemed almost deliberately cruel. The Romans, for all their engineering marvels and legal innovations, approached the human body with a mixture of reverence and fundamental misunderstanding. They saw illness as an imbalance to be corrected, often through methods that would horrify us today. Bloodletting, purging, and the application of caustic substances were standard treatments, applied with the same confidence we might have in antibiotics or pain relievers. Tonight, we'll walk through 4 interconnected stories that revealed the reality of Roman medicine. We'll begin by experiencing what it felt like to be a patient, feeling the rough wool of a Roman physician's robe against your skin as he examined care with hands that carried the lingering scent of previous patients. Then we'll explore the brilliant yet flawed mind of Galen, the empire's most influential physician, whose legacy shaped medical practice for over 1,000 years. We'll examine the mysterious artifacts and remedies that archaeologists have uncovered, bronze instruments and clay tablets that tell stories of desperate hope and ritualistic healing. Finally, we'll see how even the most powerful Romans couldn't escape the brutal realities of their era's medical practices, though they certainly tried to cushion the experience with luxury and ceremony. So let your modern anxieties fade away as we journey back to a time when a doctor's visit was truly something to dread, and find comfort in how far we've traveled from those dimly lit rooms filled with the scent of strange herbs and the sound of scraping bronze instruments. Rest easy, knowing that the greatest medical crisis you might face tomorrow is far more manageable than even the simplest ailment in ancient Rome. The fever has been with you for 3 days now, a persistent heat that seems to radiate from somewhere deep within your chest. You lie on your simple bed in your modest Roman apartment, the rough wool blankets scratching against your skin as you shift uncomfortably. The sounds of the city drift through your window, the clip-clop of horses, the calls of merchants, the distant murmur of conversations, but they feel muffled, as if they're reaching you through water. Your wife has been watching you with growing concern, bringing you watered wine and thin broth that you can barely keep down. She's suggested more than once that perhaps it's time to call for a physician. The very thought makes your stomach clench with something beyond nausea. You've heard the stories, seen the results of medical intervention in your neighbors. There's Marcus, 2 houses down, who still walks with a pronounced limp after a physician treated his broken leg. and old Claudia, who lost half her hair after a treatment for headaches that involved applying heated bronze cups to her scalp. But the fever persists, okay? And weakness has settled into your bones like cold settling into stone. When you try to stand, the room spins gently around you, and you find yourself gripping the wall for support. Your wife's face, usually so familiar and comforting, now carries an expression of barely contained worry that makes your chest tighten with more than just a fever. Finally, you nod your consent, and she hurries out into the street to find a physician. The wait feels eternal, each moment stretching like warm honey. You can hear her voice in the distance, the urgent tones of negotiation and explanation when she returns. She's accompanied by a figure that seems to fill the doorway of your small room. The physician is a middle-aged man with graying tear and hands that carried the permanent stains of his profession, dark marks under his fingernails, yellowed fingertips from handling various herbs and preparations. His robe, once white, now carries the accumulated evidence of his work, small stains, the lingering scent of previous patients, and what you hope are just shadows, but suspect might be bloodstains that never quite washed out, he carries with him. A leather bag that clinks softly as he moves, the sound of bronze instruments shifting against each other. The bag itself is worn smooth from years of use, and you notice that it's never quite closed properly. Small files and strange implements peek out from the opening like sleeping animals. "Let me examine you," he says, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. He approaches your bed and immediately begins his assessment, but not in any way you might expect. First, he holds his face close to yours, breathing in deeply. His expression is one of intense concentration, as if he's reading some invisible text written in the air around you. "Ah," he murmurs, nodding to himself. "The fever has a distinctly bilious quality to it. I can smell the excess of yellow bile in your breath, and there's something else, ... He leans closer, his own breath warm against your face. "When were you born? What season? What time of day?" You answer as best you can, though the questions seem strange. He nods, seriously, making what appear to be mental calculations. Yes, that explains the liver involvement. The stars were in a particularly challenging configuration that year for people of your constitution. Okay. Next, he asks you to extend your tongue, which you do with growing apprehension. From his bag, he produces a small bronze instrument that looks like a tiny spoon, but with a rough, textured surface. "May be uncomfortable," he says, almost casually, "okay?" And then begins to scrape your tongue with the instrument. The sensation is worse than uncomfortably, it's revolting. The bronze scrapes against the sensitive surface of your tongue, producing a sensation that makes your whole body want to recoil. He scrapes methodically, collecting what he removes on a small clay dish. The material he's gathered is examined, closely held up to the light, even smelled. "Significant corruption," he announces, showing the contents of the dish to your wife, who has gone pale. "The tongue is the window to the internal organs, and what I see here confirms my initial assessment. The bile is indeed corrupted, and there are signs of phlegmatic accumulation in the lungs." Okay. He returns the scraping instrument to his bag and produces what looks like a small bronze cup. "We'll need to draw some of the corrupted blood to restore balance," he explains, heating the cup over a small flame he's produced from somewhere in his bag. The bronze glows with a dull orange light, and you can feel the heat radiating from it, even from a distance. The heated cup is applied to your chest, and immediately your skin is drawn up into it with a painful suction. The sensation is like being pinched by invisible fingers, and you can feel your skin stretching and reddening under the bronze. He applies several more cups along your chest and back, each one creating its own circle of discomfort. "The corrupted blood will be drawn to the surface," he explains to your wife, who watches with fascination and horror. You can see how the skin reddens and risosets, the bad blood being pulled away from the vital organs. After what feels like an eternity, he removes the cups, leaving behind circular marks on your skin that look like brands. Some are simply red and swollen, but others have actually drawn blood to the surface, creating small, dark patches that throb with each heartbeat. But the physician isn't finished. From his bag, he produces a small vial of dark liquid that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. This is a preparation of wormwood, myrrh, and pigeon droppings, dissolved in wine, he explains matter-of-factly. The pigeon droppings are particularly effective against fevers of the bilious type. The birds, you see, have a natural heat that counteracts the cold corruption that's causing your illness. The smell that rises from the vial when he opens it is indescribably mixture of fermentation, decay, and something sharply medicinal that makes your sinuses burn. You look at your wife, hoping for some intervention, but she only nods encouragingly. This is medicine, after all. This is what people do when they're sick. Drink it all at once, the physician instructs. The taste is distinctive, but it's important not to hesitate. The medicine works best when taken decisively. The liquid touches your lips, and immediately you understand why he warned you about hesitation. Okay? The taste is beyond bitter, it's actively hostile to your senses. The wine provides no relief from the other flavors, only adding a fermented sharpness that makes everything worse. You can feel the gritty texture of the pigeon droppings on your tongue, and the wormwood creates a burning sensation that spreads through your mouth and throat. But you force it down, gulp by gulp, while the physician watches approvingly. Your stomach, already sensitive from the fever, immediately begins to rebel against this new assault. You can feel it churning, trying to reject what you've just consumed, but the physician places a firm hand on your shoulder. The initial reaction is normal, he says. Your body is fighting the medicine because it's grown accustomed to the corruption, but we must persist. The battle between health and disease is never easy. The nausea builds in waves, each one stronger than the last. You can taste the medicine again as it threatens to return, and the combination of flavors is somehow even worse the second time. Your wife holds a bowl nearby, just in case, but the physician discourages this. If possible, the medicine should be retained, he says. Purging has its place, but not immediately after treatment. The body needs time to absorb the healing properties. The immediate nausea begins to subside, replaced by a deep, uncomfortable churning. The physician begins to pack his instruments. The treatment will work through the night, he explains. By morning, you should feel the fever beginning to break. The cups will leave marks for several days, but that's normal. Then the medicine. Well, you may experience some digestive distress as your body expels the corrupted bile. He pauses at the door, his bag once again clinking softly. If the fever doesn't break by tomorrow evening, send for me again. We may need to consider a more aggressive approach. The way he says more aggressive makes your skin crawl more than the fever ever did. After he leaves, you lie back on your bed, feeling the throb of the cup marks on your chest and the continued churning in your stomach. Your wife tries to comfort you, but you can see the worry in her eyes hasn't diminished. If anything, it's grown stronger. You've submitted to medical treatment, but whether you'll emerge from this experience healthier or simply more damaged remains to be seen. The fever continues to burn through your body, accompanied by the lingering taste of pigeon droppings and the constant reminder of the physician's touch. You close your eyes and try to find some rest, but sleep seems as distant as health itself. This is what it means to be sick in Rome, not just to battle disease, but to survive the cure itself. Dawn creeps through your window with the same gray reluctance that seems to characterize everything about your current state. The fever hasn't broken, if anything. It feels more entrenched, as if it settled into your bones for a long stay. But now It's accompanied by a host of new discomforts that make you question whether calling the physician was wisdom or folly. Your chest throbs with each heartbeat, the circular marks from the bronze cups having darkened overnight into deep purple bruises. When you shift position, the fabric of your tunic brushes against these tender spots, sending sharp reminders of yesterday's treatment through your already aching body. The marks are perfectly circular, like brands, and you can't help but run your fingers over them, feeling the raised, swollen skin that seems to radiate heat. Your wife stirs beside you, and you can see in her face the same mixture of hope and concern that kept her awake through much of the night. She's been listening to your breathing, you realize, waiting for some sign that the physician's treatment has worked its promised magic. Instead, she finds you still fevered, still weak, and now bearing the additional burden of the cure's aftermath. Do you feel? She asks, though your expression probably answers the question before you speak. Different, you manage, your voice hoarse from the night's restless sleep. Not better, just ... different. The truth is more complex than you can easily express. The fever remains, but now it's layered with other sensations, the persistent taste of wormwood and wine that seems to have taken permanent residence in your mouth, the way your stomach continues to churn with irregular spasms, the peculiar weakness that feels different from the weakness of illness. This is the weakness of treatment, of a body that's been forced to process things it was never meant to contain. You attempt to sit up, and immediately your stomach rebels. The movement sends a wave of nausea through you that's sharper and more immediate than anything the fever produced. You lean over the side of the bed, dry heaving, your body trying to expel something that's no longer there but somehow still present. Your wife brings you water, but even the thought of drinking makes your stomach contract. The physician's warning about digestive distress seems woefully inadequate to describe what you're experiencing. This isn't mere discomfort, it's as if your entire digestive system has been turned inside, out, and is slowly trying to right itself. Perhaps your wife suggests tentatively we should send for the physician again. He said if the fever didn't break, ... The suggestion fills you with a dread that's entirely separate from your physical discomfort. The thought of submitting to another session of scraping, cupping, and whatever new concoction might be deemed necessary makes your skin crawl. But what alternative do you have? The fever persists, and now you're dealing with the additional burden of the treatment's effects. As if summoned by your thoughts, there's a knock at the door. Your wife goes to answer it, and you hear the familiar voice of the physician, though you don't remember sending for him. Apparently, he's made it a habit to check on his patients the morning after treatment. It's practice that speaks either to dedication or to the frequency with which his treatments require adjustment. Still fevered, he observes, approaching your bed with the same clinical detachment he showed yesterday, but I can see the cupping has had its effect. Look at these marks, excellent drawing of the corrupted blood. The darkness of the bruising tells us that there was indeed significant corruption that needed to be addressed. He examines the circular marks on your chest with obvious satisfaction, pressing gently around the edges in a way that makes you wince. And the medicine. How did your body respond to the preparation? You described the nausea, the continued churning in your stomach, the way food seems impossible to contemplate. He nods approvingly throughout your description, as if these are all positive developments. Excellent, excellent. The body is purging itself of the corrupted bile, exactly as intended. The nausea is simply the natural process of expelling toxins, and the continued fever tells us that we're engaged in a real battle here. The disease is fighting back, which means our treatment is having an effect. From his bag, he produces a different vial, this one containing a liquid that's almost transparent, but with a faint greenish tint. This is a preparation of hellebore and honey, with a small amount of powdered pearls for their cooling properties. The hellebore will help purge the remaining bile, and the pearls will provide a counterbalance to the heat of the fever. The mention of hellebore makes your wife step forward. Even you, in your fevered state, know that hellebore is dangerous, used to purge the bowels so violently that people have been known to die from the treatment. But the physician waves away her concerns with practiced ease. Hellebore is indeed potent, he acknowledges, but that's precisely why it's effective. The corruption in your husband's system has proven stubborn. We need something equally stubborn to fight it. The dose I prepared is carefully calculated based on his constitution and the position of the moon. He holds the vial up to the light, and you can see small particles floating in the liquid, the powdered pearls. You assume, though they look more like gritty sediment than the cooling medicine he's described. The pearls were ground during the hour of Venus, when their cooling properties are at their strongest. And the honey was collected from bees that fed on thyme and rosemary herbs that are particularly effective against bilious fevers. The liquid in the vial seems to shimmer slightly, though whether from the pearls or from some other component, you can't tell. The physician removes the stopper, and immediately a sharp, medicinal smell fills the room. It's different from yesterday's preparation cleaner, but somehow more ominous. There's an edge to it that makes your already sensitive stomach contract. This time, we'll take a different approach, the physician explains. Instead of drinking the medicine all at once, you'll take it in small sips throughout the day. This will allow your body to process it more gradually and should reduce the digestive dramatics of yesterday. He hands you the vial, and you notice that his fingernails are stained with what looks like the same greenish tint as the liquid. Take a small sip now, then another every hour until the sun reaches its peak. After that, every 2 hours until sunset. By tomorrow morning, we should see significant improvement. The first sip is a shock to your system. The hellebore has a bitter, acrid taste that's completely different from yesterday's earthy mixture. It burns your throat, going down, leaving behind a sensation like swallowing liquid fire. The honey provides no relief, if anything. It seems to intensify the burning by making it stick to your throat and mouth. But it's the aftertaste that's truly disturbing. Something metallic and sharp, like blood mixed with copper, spreads across your tongue. The powdered pearls add a gritty texture that makes you feel like you're chewing on sand. You can feel the mixture settling in your stomach, where it immediately begins to generate heat and pressure. Good, the physician says, watching your reaction with professional interest. The immediate response tells us that the medicine is already beginning to work. The burning sensation is the hellebore attacking the corrupted bile directly. What you're feeling is the battle between medicine and disease. Within minutes, you can feel the hellebore beginning to work. Your stomach starts to cramp in a way that's different from the nausea of yesterday's. It's more urgent, more demanding. The pressure builds steadily, and you realize, with growing alarm, that you're going to need to visit the latrine, and soon. Ah, yes, the physician says, noting your obvious discomfort. The purging will begin within the hour. This is entirely normal and, indeed, desirable. The body needs to expel the corrupted bile, and the hellebore provides the necessary ... encouragement. Next few hours pass in a blur of discomfort and indignity. The hellebore works exactly as promised, purging your system with a violence that leaves you weak and shaking. Each sip of the medicine throughout the day brings a new wave of cramping and purging, until you feel as though you've been turned inside out. Your wife hovers nearby, bringing you water to replace what you're losing, but even water seems to pass through you without pause. The fever continues to burn, but now it's accompanied by chills from the constant loss of fluids. You're caught between the heat of the fever and the cold of dehydration, shivering even as sweat beads on your forehead. By evening, you're exhausted in a way that goes beyond mere tiredness. This is the exhaustion of a body that's been pushed past its limits forced to endure not just disease, but the violent cure that's supposed to restore health. The circular marks on your chest have darkened further, and now they're joined by the constant ache in your abdomen from the day's purging. The physician returns as the sun sets, ostensibly to check on your progress, but clearly expecting to find you improved. Instead, he finds you weaker than before, though admittedly emptied of everything your body once contained. Excellent progress, he declares, examining you with the same professional satisfaction. The purging has been thorough. You can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself. The corrupted bile has been expelled, and now we can begin the work of rebuilding your natural balance. He produces yet another vial, this one containing a thick, dark liquid that looks like congealed blood. This is a strengthening preparation iron. Filings dissolved in wine with powdered bone meal and dried liver. It will help restore the blood that was lost during the purging and provide the strength your body needs to complete its healing. The thought of consuming anything, let alone something that looks like liquid metal, makes your stomach clench. But the physician's expression brooks no argument. Okay, this is medicine, and medicine, by definition, must be consumed. The iron preparation tastes exactly as you'd expect liquid metal to taste: sharp, metallic, with an underlying funkiness from the organ meat. It coats your throat and tongue with a film that makes every swallow a conscious effort. Your stomach, already raw from the day's purging, rebels immediately against this new assault. The taste is strong, the physician acknowledges, but iron is what the blood craves. Your body will learn to accept it, and by tomorrow, you'll begin to feel the strength returning. As he prepares to leave, he pauses at the door with the same ominous expression he wore yesterday. The fever should break sometime during the night. If it doesn't, we'll need to consider more intensive measures. Sometimes the corruption runs deeper than initially appears, and we must be prepared to match our treatment to the severity of the disease. After he leaves, you lie back on your bed, feeling hollowed out and raw. The fever continues to burn, but now it's the only familiar sensation in a body that feels completely foreign. You've been scraped, cupped, purged, and dosed with substances that would horrify a modern person. All in the name of healing. Your wife sits beside you, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She's been watching you suffer for 2 days now, seeing you submit to treatments that seem designed more to test your endurance than to cure your illness. The look in her eyes tells you that she's beginning to wonder, as you are, whether the cure might be worse than the disease. As darkness settles over the city, you close your eyes and try to find some position that doesn't aggravate the various discomforts competing for your attention. The fever burns on, unchanged by all the physician's efforts, while your body slowly tries to recover from the violence of treatment. This is Roman medicine, not a gentle restoration of health, but a battle fought on the terrain of your own flesh, with victory measured, not in comfort, but in mere survival. The third morning arrives with a cruel mockery of hope. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, you almost believe the fever has broken. Your body feels different, lighter somehow, as if some burden has been lifted. But as consciousness fully returns, you realize that the lightness comes not from health, but from emptiness. Your body has been so thoroughly purged, scraped, and dosed that there's simply less of you than there was 3 days ago. The fever persists with the same stubborn determination it showed from the beginning, but now it burns in a body that feels hollowed out, scraped clean from the inside. Your skin has taken on a waxy pallor that your wife tries to hide her reaction to, but you can see the fear growing in her eyes. The circular marks from the bronze cups have evolved into deep purple bruises, surrounded by yellowish halos, like miniature suns setting into your flesh. Your mouth tastes permanently of metal and bitterness now. as if the various medicines have stained not just your tongue, but your very essence. Water tastes strange, food is unthinkable, and even your own saliva carries the lingering flavors of hellebore and iron. You've become a walking repository of Roman medical theory. Your body, a testing ground for substances that blur the line between medicine and poison. When your wife mentions, with obvious reluctance, that the physician will likely visit again today, you feel something inside you recoil with an intensity that surprises you. The thought of submitting to another round of treatment fills you with a dread that goes beyond mere physical discomfort. You're beginning to understand that Roman medicine isn't just about curing disease, it's about proving your worthiness to live through an ordeal that tests every limit of human endurance. Perhaps, you suggest weakly, we should give the treatments time to work. The physician said the fever might take time to break, and my body needs rest to recover from the purging. Your wife nods, but you can see the conflict in her face. She's torn between her desire to see you healed and her growing horror at what healing seems to require. She's watched you endure treatments that would be considered torture in any other context, all administered with the calm confidence of medical authority. But as the morning progresses, it becomes clear that the decision isn't entirely yours to make. The physician arrives unbidden, his leather bag clinking with its cargo of bronze instruments and mysterious preparations. He takes one look at you and nods with the satisfaction of someone whose predictions have been confirmed. The fever's resistance tells us we're dealing with a particularly stubborn corruption, he announces, settling beside your bed with the air of someone preparing for a lengthy consultation. 3 days of treatment have revealed the true nature of your illness. This isn't merely a simple bilious fever. This is what we call a deep corruption, where the disease has established itself in the very marrow of your bones. He begins his examination with the same ritual sniffing and observation, but now his movements carry a more serious weight. The breath carries new scents, he murmurs, leaning close to your face. I detect notes of corruption from the liver, and there's a sweetness that suggests the involvement of the spleen. Your body is telling us a story of disease that runs deeper than we initially understood. From his bag, he produces an instrument you haven't seen before, bronze probe, that's longer and more slender than anything he's used previously. It gleams with a dull light that seems to absorb rather than reflect the morning sun streaming through your window. We need to investigate the deeper corruption, he explains. Sometimes the disease hides in places that can only be reached through more direct methods. The probe is designed, he explains, to explore the natural openings of the body and assess the internal corruption that external treatments haven't been able to reach. The very description makes your already sensitive stomach contract with anticipation of new indignities. The procedure is uncomfortable, he admits, but it allows us to understand exactly where the corruption has established itself. Once we know the precise location and nature of the disease, we can apply treatments that are specifically targeted to those areas. What follows is an examination that redefines your understanding of medical humiliation. The bronze probe is used to explore areas of your body that you've never imagined could be part of medical treatment. The physician maintains his clinical detachment throughout, explaining what he's finding as if he's reading from a medical text, rather than violating your most basic sense of physical privacy. Significant inflammation here, he notes, manipulating the probe in ways that make you grip the edges of your bed, and the color of the discharge tells us that the corruption has indeed spread beyond the stomach and liver. We're looking at a systemic corruption that will require equally systematic treatment. When the examination is finally complete, you lie gasping and shaking, feeling as though you've been turned inside out for inspection. The physician cleans his probe with a cloth that's already stained with the evidence of previous examinations, then returns it to his bag with the same casual air with which he might put away a stylus. The good news, he says, as if anything about this experience could be considered good, is that we now understand the full scope of the problem. The corruption is extensive, yes, but it follows patterns that are well documented in medical literature. We have treatments that are specifically designed for this type of deep systemic corruption. He produces a new vial, larger than the previous ones, and containing a liquid that seems to shift between different colors as he moves it in the light. This is a preparation of mercury, antimony, and crushed emeralds suspended in wine that has been blessed by the priests of Asclepius. The mercury will attack the corruption directly. The antimony will strengthen your body's natural defenses, and the emeralds will provide protection against the spiritual aspects of the disease. The mention of mercury makes your wife step forward in alarm. Even in ancient Rome, mercury is known to be dangerous, associated with madness and death. But the physician explains that this is precisely why it's effective against deep corruption. Is a divine metal, he says, capable of transforming itself from liquid to vapor to solid. This transformative power makes it uniquely suited to combat diseases that have themselves transformed from simple fevers into deep corruptions. The emeralds provide protection against the mercury's more volatile effects. The liquid in the vial seems to move with its own life, swirling and shifting, even when held perfectly still. When he removes the stopper, a sharp metallic smell fills the room, accompanied by something else, something that makes your sinuses burn and your eyes water. This must be taken all at once, the physician instructs, and then you must remain perfectly still for at least 2 hours while the medicine does its work. Any movement could disrupt the mercury's action and cause it to settle in the wrong parts of your body. The mercury preparation slides down your throat like liquid fire, leaving behind a taste that's beyond metallic. It's the taste of transformation itself, as if your mouth is being turned into something else entirely. Your stomach immediately begins to convulse, but the physician places a firm hand on your chest. You must not purge this medicine, he says sternly. The mercury needs time to travel through your body and locate the corruption. If you expel it too quickly, it will take the corruption with it. Yes, but it may also take parts of you that you need to keep. The next 2 hours are unlike anything you've ever experienced. The mercury seems to move through your body with its own agenda, creating sensations that are impossible to describe. You feel it in your teeth, making them ache with a deep, penetrating pain. You feel it in your fingertips, creating a tingling that's both numbness and hypersensitivity. It's most disturbing of all. You feel it in your thoughts, making your mind feel as liquid and unstable as the medicine itself. Your wife sits beside you, holding your hand, but afraid to speak. Afraid that any disturbance might disrupt whatever process is taking place inside your body. You can see your own fear reflected in her eyes. The growing realization that this treatment might cure you or kill you, and that there's no way to know which until it's too late. The physician monitors your progress by checking your pulse and examining your eyes, which he says reveal the mercury's progress through your system. Good, good, he murmurs at intervals. The mercury is finding the corruption and binding with it. I can see it in the way your pupils respond to light, and the way your pulse changes rhythm. When the 2 hours are finally complete, you're allowed to sit up slowly. The world feels different, not better, exactly, but changed in ways that are difficult to define. The fever still burns, but now it feels muffled, as if it's coming from farther away. Your body feels simultaneously heavy and weightless, solid and liquid. The mercury will continue to work for several days, the physician explains as he packs his instruments. You may experience some unusual sensations as it completes its task. Some patients report vivid dreams, changes in their perception of color and sound, even temporary alterations in their thinking patterns. This is all normal and indicates that the medicine is working. He pauses at the door, and his expression carries a weight that hasn't been there in his previous visits. If the mercury treatment doesn't resolve the corruption within 3 days, we'll need to consider surgical intervention. Sometimes the corruption forms what we call pockets, concentrations, of disease that can only be removed by cutting them out directly. The mention of surgery sends a chill through you that has nothing to do with your fever. Roman surgery is legendary for its brutality, and the survival rates are ... optimistic at best. The thought of submitting to bronze knives and saws, applied by the same hands that have already subjected you to 3 days of increasingly invasive treatments, fills you with a terror that goes beyond rational fear. After the physician leaves, you lie back against your pillows, feeling the mercury continue its mysterious work inside your body. Your wife brings you water, but the taste is strange. Everything tastes strange now. As if the mercury has changed not just your body, but your relationship to the world around you. The fever burns on, unchanged by all the physician's interventions. But now you're no longer sure whether you're fighting the disease or fighting the cure. Your body has become a battlefield where multiple forces clash their original fever, so various medicines and your own increasingly desperate attempts to survive the treatment. As evening approaches, you find yourself wondering whether healing is supposed to feel like this, like being systematically dismantled and rebuilt using materials that were never meant to be part of a human body. The circular bruises on your chest throb with each heartbeat. Your stomach churns with the aftermath of multiple purgings. And now the mercury adds its own strange symphony of sensations to the orchestra of discomfort that has become your existence. This is what it means to be sick in ancient Rome, not just to suffer from disease, but to endure a cure that tests every limit of human endurance. You close your eyes and try to find some position that brings relief, but comfort seems as distant as health itself. Ain't this world? Survival isn't just about overcoming illness, it's about surviving the very treatments designed to save you. The night stretches ahead. It's filled with the promise of mercury dreams and the growing dread of what tomorrow might bring if the fever still refuses to break. You've learned that in Roman medicine, there's always another level of intervention, another treatment more aggressive than the last. The only question is whether your body will survive long enough to discover whether any of it actually works. While you lie in your fevered state, enduring treatments that seem designed to test the limits of human endurance, it's worth understanding that the physician attending you is following methods developed by one of history's most brilliant and influential minds. His name was Galen of Pergamon, and his theories about medicine would dominate Western medical practice for over 1,500 years. Yet, for all his genius, Galen was also the architect of many of the practices that would make you dread a doctor's visit in ancient Rome. Picture, if you will, a young man growing up in the prosperous city of Pergamon around 130 AD. Galen's father, the Khan, was a wealthy architect and mathematician, a man who valued learning above all else and ensured his son received the finest education available in the Greek world. From his earliest years, Galen was immersed in philosophy, mathematics, and the natural sciences, developing the kind of systematic, analytical mind that would later revolutionize medical practice. But Galen's path to medicine wasn't initially planned. As a young man, he was more interested in philosophy and rhetoric, the traditional pursuits of educated Greeks. He studied at the great library of Pergamon, one of the largest in the ancient world, second only to Alexandria. Here, surrounded by scrolls containing the accumulated knowledge of centuries, young Galen developed his lifelong habit of voracious reading and his conviction that true knowledge came from combining theoretical understanding with practical observation. The turning point came when Galen was 16. His father experienced a vivid dream in which the god Asclepius appeared and instructed him to direct his son toward the study of medicine. In the ancient world, such dreams were taken seriously. They were considered direct communication from the divine realm. Ken immediately arranged for Galen to begin medical studies, a decision that would change not just his son's life, but the entire course of medical history. Galen's medical education was unlike anything available to physicians in your time. He traveled extensively, studying at the greatest medical centers of the ancient world. In Smyrna, he learned anatomy from disciples of the great physician Pelops. In Corinth, he studied the works of Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine. But it was in Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean world, that Galen's true education began. Alexandria, in the 150s AD, was a city unlike any other. The great library still functioned, though diminished from its ancient glory. And the medical school there had access to human cadavers, a rarity in the ancient world. Where religious and cultural taboos made human dissection extremely difficult. For nearly 4 years, Galen immersed himself in the systematic study of human anatomy, learning not just the names and locations of body parts, but beginning to understand how they functioned together as a unified system. But Galen wasn't content with book learning alone. He sought out every opportunity to observe the human body in action. In Alexandria, he found the perfect laboratory, the gladiatorial schools. The gladiators, with their frequent and varied injuries, provided an unprecedented opportunity to study anatomy in living subjects. Galen would later describe gladiator wounds as windows into the body, allowing him to observe organs and systems that were normally hidden from view. Imagine the young Galen, barely in his 20s, bending over a wounded gladiator in the dusty training grounds outside Alexandria. The fighter has taken a sword thrust that penetrated his abdominal wall but somehow missed vital organs. As Galen cleans and examines the wound, he's not just treating an injury, he's conducting an anatomical study. He can see the layers of muscle, the way they're arranged to protect the organs beneath. He can observe how the peritoneum, the membrane that lines the abdominal cavity, responds to injury. He's building a three-dimensional understanding of human anatomy that no amount of reading could provide. This hands-on approach to learning would define Galen's entire career. Unlike many physicians of his era, who relied primarily on theoretical knowledge passed down through generations of medical texts, Galen insisted on combining theory with direct observation. He dissected animals, extensively pigs, goats, monkeys, even elephants when he could obtain them, always seeking to understand not just what was inside the body, but how it all worked together. After completing his education in Alexandria, Galen returned to Pergamon, where he was appointed physician to the gladiators, a position that was both prestigious and terrifying. The gladiators were valuable property, and their owners expected their physician to keep them alive and fighting fit. Failure to heal a champion gladiator could mean not just professional embarrassment, but significant financial consequences. The pressure was immense, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that brought out Galen's best work during his 4 years as physician to the gladiators. Galen developed many of the techniques that your own physician now employs. He perfected the art of wound cleaning and suturing, developed new methods for treating fractures, and most importantly, began to understand the body as a unified system rather than a collection of separate parts. When a gladiator suffered a head injury, Galen didn't just treat the wound, he observed how the injury affected the fighter's balance, coordination, and mental function. He was beginning to map the connections between different parts of the body in ways that no previous physician had attempted. But Galen's true genius lay not just in his observational skills, but in his ability to synthesize what he observed into comprehensive theories. He began to develop a systematic understanding of how the body worked, building on the ancient Greek theory of the 4 humus blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, but adding layers of complexity and nuance that transformed it from a simple classification system into a sophisticated medical theory. According to Galen's understanding, health was a matter of balance between these four humors. But the balance wasn't static, it shifted constantly based on diet, exercise, emotional state, the season, even the position of the stars. Disease occurred when this balance was disrupted, and the physician's job was to identify the specific nature of the imbalance and correct it through appropriate interventions. This is why your physician spent so much time smelling your breath and examining your tongue. Okay? In Galen's system, every aspect of the body's function reflected the underlying humoral balance. Okay? The color of your urine, the texture of your skin, the smell of your sweat, all of these were diagnostic indicators that revealed the precise nature of your illness. A skilled physician, trained in Galen's methods, could theoretically diagnose any condition simply by careful observation and systematic analysis. The treatments that have made your recovery so miserable also flowed directly from Galen's theories. If disease was caused by an excess of corrupted bile, then the logical treatment was to purge that bile from the body through vomiting, diarrhea, or bloodletting. If the corruption was deeply seated, then more aggressive interventions were necessary. Hence, the mercury preparation that currently courses through your system, carrying out its mysterious work in the hidden corners of your body. But Galen wasn't content with developing theories about how the body worked. He was also a gifted writer and lecturer, and he began to document his methods and discoveries in a series of medical texts that would become the foundation of medical education for centuries to come. His writing style was confident, even arrogant, reflecting his conviction that he had discovered fundamental truths about human physiology that previous physicians had missed in 162 AD. When Galen was in his early 30s, he made the decision that would define the rest of his career. He traveled to Rome. The imperial capital was the center of the known world, a place where ambitious men came to make their mark on history. For a physician, Rome offered unparalleled opportunities, wealthy clientele, access to the imperial court, and the chance to establish himself as the leading medical authority of his generation. Rome in the 160s was a city of contrasts that would have both fascinated and appalled a modern observer. The wealth and power of the empire were on display everywhere: magnificent public buildings, elaborate private homes, luxury goods from the far corners of the known world. But it was also a city where disease and suffering were constant companions. Cada, the crowded insulae where the poor lived, were breeding grounds for epidemics. The wealthy might have access to the best medical care available, but that care was still limited by the understanding and tools of the time. Galen arrived in Rome with a reputation that preceded him. Stories of his success with the gladiators had spread throughout the medical community, and he quickly found himself in demand among the wealthy and powerful. But he also faced skepticism and hostility from the established physicians of Rome, who viewed this confident young Greek as an upstart, threatening their established practices. To prove his worth, Galen began giving public demonstrations of his anatomical knowledge and surgical techniques. These weren't just medical procedures, they were theatrical performances, designed to showcase his superiority over his competitors. He would dissect animals in front of audiences of physicians and educated lay people, explaining not just what he was revealing, but why his understanding was more accurate and comprehensive than what had come before. One of his most famous demonstrations involved a live pig. In front of a crowd of skeptical Roman physicians, Galen made a series of precise cuts that severed specific nerves, controlling the pig's vocal cords. The animal fell silent, demonstrating Galen's understanding of the nervous system in a way that was both scientifically impressive and dramatically effective. His competitors, who had spent their careers memorizing ancient texts without understanding the underlying anatomy, could only watch in stunned silence. These public demonstrations established Galen's reputation, but they also revealed something important about his character. He wasn't content with simply being a skilled physician. He needed to be recognized as the most skilled physician. He approached medicine with the same competitive spirit that had driven him to succeed with the gladiators, always seeking to prove his superiority over his rivals. This competitive drive led Galen to make increasingly bold claims about his abilities and understanding. He positioned himself not just as a physician, but as a philosopher and scientist who had uncovered fundamental truths about the nature of life itself. His medical theories became increasingly complex and systematic, attempting to explain not just how to treat disease, but why disease occurred and how the entire universe was organized. In Galen's mature system, the human body was understood as a microcosm of the larger universe, governed by the same principles that controlled the movement of the planets and the changing of the seasons. This is why your physician asked about the time and season of your birth in Galen's understanding. The configuration of the heavens at the moment of birth determined your fundamental constitution and influenced how your body would respond to both disease and treatment. The astrological components of Galen's medicine weren't simply superstition. They reflected a sophisticated attempt to understand the human body as part of a larger, interconnected system. If the moon could influence the tides, Galen reasoned, then surely the positions of the planets could influence the flow of humors through the human body. A physician who ignored these cosmic influences was like a sailor who ignored the weather. He might occasionally succeed through luck, but he would never achieve consistent results. This holistic approach to medicine helps explain why Roman medical treatment could seem so comprehensive, yet so invasive. Your physician isn't just treating your fever. He's attempting to restore your entire being to proper harmony with the cosmic order. The various medicines, the cupping, the purging, all of these interventions are designed to address not just the immediate symptoms, but the underlying imbalance that allowed disease to take hold in the first place. Galen's influence on Roman medicine was so profound that by the time of your illness, his theories had become essentially synonymous with medical knowledge itself. Physicians throughout the empire learned his methods, memorized his texts, and applied his treatments with the confidence that comes from following established authority. The physician treating you has probably never questioned whether Galen's methods are correct. They simply are correct, by definition, because Galen developed them. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Galen wasn't his medical theories or his surgical techniques, it was his absolute confidence in his own understanding. He approached each patient, each case, each medical challenge with the unwavering conviction that his methods would succeed if properly applied. This confidence was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. It led him to develop treatments that were indeed more effective than what had come before. But it also led him to apply those treatments with an aggressiveness that often seemed to test the limits of human endurance. As you lie in your bed, feeling the mercury work its mysterious changes in your body, you're experiencing the direct legacy of one of history's most influential minds. Every sensation, every treatment, every theoretical justification for why you must endure what you're enduring flows from the brilliant, systematic, and ultimately overconfident intellect of Galen of Pergamon. Understanding his story helps explain not just why Roman medicine was so advanced for its time, but also why it could be so terrifying for those who experienced it firsthand. Galen's arrival in Rome marked the beginning of what would become one of the most extraordinary medical careers in history. But it also revealed the darker implications of his systematic approach to healing. As his reputation grew among the Roman elite, so did his conviction that medicine was not merely about alleviating suffering, but about understanding the fundamental nature of life itself, even if that understanding required patience to endure treatments that tested the very limits of human endurance. Within months of establishing his practice in Rome, Galen found himself treating some of the most powerful figures in the empire. His first major breakthrough came when he successfully treated Eudemus, a prominent philosopher who had been suffering from a fever that had resisted all previous treatment. The case was remarkably similar to your own persistent fever that seemed to mock the efforts of conventional physicians. But where your physician follows Galen's methods with the confidence of established practice, Galen himself was still developing those methods, experimenting with combinations of treatments that would either cure his patient or establish the limits of what the human body could endure. Eudemus had been ill for weeks when Galen was called to his bedside. The philosopher's previous physicians had applied the standard treatments of the era: bloodletting, purging, and various herbal preparations, but the fever had only grown stronger. When Galen examined Eudemus, he didn't just observe the symptoms, he interrogated them. He spent hours asking detailed questions about the patient's diet, sleep patterns, emotional state, and even his philosophical beliefs in Galen's emerging system. The mind and body was so intimately connected that a patient's thoughts could influence the course of his disease. The treatment Galen devised for Eudemus was revolutionary in its systematic complexity. Instead of simply applying standard remedies, he developed what he called a comprehensive correction, a treatment plan that addressed not just the immediate symptoms, but what he believed to be the underlying constitutional imbalance that had allowed the disease to take hold. The plan involved precise dietary modifications, timed doses of specific medicines, physical exercises designed to promote the proper flow of humors, and even philosophical discussions intended to address the mental components of the illness. But the most striking aspect of Galen's treatment was his use of what he termed controlled suffering. He had observed that the body's natural healing responses were often triggered by stress, and he theorized that carefully applied discomfort could stimulate the patient's own healing mechanisms. This wasn't simple sadism, was a sophisticated medical theory that viewed pain as a diagnostic tool and therapeutic intervention. For Eudemus, this meant enduring treatments that were deliberately designed to be uncomfortable. Galen applied heated bronze instruments to specific points on the philosopher's body, not just to draw corrupted blood to the surface, but to create precisely controlled inflammation that would, in his theory, redirect the body's healing energy to the affected areas. He administered medicines that were intentionally bitter and difficult to tolerate, believing that the body's struggle to process these substances would strengthen its overall resistance to disease. The most controversial aspect of the treatment involved what Galen called therapeutic crisis, deliberately inducing a medical emergency that would force the patient's body to mobilize all its healing resources. For Eudemus, this meant taking a preparation that contained a carefully calculated dose of a mild poison, combined with antidotes that would prevent permanent harm, while still creating a crisis that would shock the system into healing. The treatment worked. Eudemus not only recovered, but claimed to feel stronger and more mentally acute than he had in years. Word of Galen's success spread rapidly through Roman society, but so did disturbing stories about his methods. Patients who survived his treatments often described them as transformative experiences that bordered on spiritual ordeals. Those who didn't survive, and there were some, became a subject of whispered conversations about the price of Galen's revolutionary approach to medicine. The success with Eudemus established Galen's reputation, but it also attracted the attention of someone far more dangerous, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself. The emperor, a philosopher king who was fascinated by questions of suffering and endurance, summoned Galen to court, not just as a physician, but as a fellow thinker who might help him understand the relationship between physical pain and spiritual growth. Marcus Aurelius was unlike any patient Galen had treated before. The emperor wasn't simply seeking relief from illness, he was searching for philosophical insights that could be gained through the experience of medical treatment. He had read Galen's early writings about the connection between physical and mental health, and he was intrigued by the idea that controlled suffering might serve as a form of philosophical education. Their first consultation took place in the emperor's private study, surrounded by scrolls of Stoic philosophy and medical texts. Marcus Aurelius described symptoms that were real, but not severe headaches, digestive discomfort, occasional sleeplessness. But he made it clear that he was less interested in relief than in understanding what his symptoms could teach him about the nature of human existence. Galen recognized that he was being presented with an unprecedented opportunity. Here was the most powerful man in the world, asking him to design a medical treatment that would serve as a philosophical experiment. The treatment Galen developed for Marcus Aurelius would influence not just the emperor's health, but the entire future direction of Roman medicine. The emperor's treatment regimen was elegant in its systematic complexity. Galen designed what he called a philosophical cure, a series of medical interventions that were intended to strengthen not just the body, but the character. Each treatment was accompanied by detailed explanations of its theoretical basis, turning every medical procedure into a lesson about the nature of physical existence and human resilience. Marcus Aurelius was subjected to controlled bloodletting sessions where the amount of blood drawn was calculated not just for medical effect, but for its impact on mental clarity. Galen had observed that moderate blood loss often produced a state of heightened awareness, what he termed purified consciousness, where patients reported enhanced ability to think clearly and perceive subtle truths about their condition. The emperor's diet was regulated according to principles that combined medical theory with philosophical practice. Certain foods were prohibited, not because they were harmful, but because abstaining from them would strengthen the will and demonstrate mastery over physical desires. Other foods were prescribed in specific combinations and quantities designed to produce particular mental states. Alertness.com, or what Galen called contemplative receptivity. But the most remarkable aspect of the emperor's treatment involved what Galen termed educational pain. Drawing on his theory that controlled suffering could serve as a form of learning, he designed procedures that were intentionally uncomfortable but not dangerous. Marcus Aurelius underwent regular sessions where heated bronze instruments were applied to specific points on his body, not to treat any particular ailment, but to help him understand and master his responses to physical discomfort. These sessions took place in the emperor's private chambers, with Galen serving simultaneously as physician, philosopher, and guide. As the heated bronze touched the emperor's skin, creating carefully controlled pain, Marcus Aurelius would practice stoic mental exercises designed to maintain emotional equilibrium despite physical discomfort. The sessions became a form of collaborative research into the relationship between body and mind, with the emperor serving as both subject and co-investigator. The success of Galen's treatment of Marcus Aurelius established more than just his medical reputation. It fundamentally altered the expectations surrounding medical practice throughout the Roman Empire. What had begun as innovative treatments for individual patients evolved into a systematic approach to medicine that demanded extraordinary endurance from anyone seeking healing. As Galen aged and his influence spread, the consequences of his revolutionary methods became increasingly apparent, both in the remarkable cures he achieved and in the trail of patients who paid dearly for the privilege of experiencing his advanced medical care. Following his triumph with the emperor, Galen found himself in the unprecedented position of being the most sought-after physician in the known world. Wealthy Romans competed for his attention, offering enormous sums not just for treatment, but for the prestige of being treated by the man who had served the emperor himself. But this success brought with it pressures and expectations that began to push Galen's methods toward even greater extremes. The wealthy patients who now sought Galen's services weren't simply looking for relief from illness. They wanted transformative experiences that would demonstrate their sophistication and commitment to the most advanced medical practices available. They had heard stories of the emperor's philosophical awakening through controlled suffering, and they demanded similar opportunities for growth through ordeal. Galen, never one to back down from a challenge, began developing increasingly elaborate treatment protocols that combined medical intervention with what could only be described as spiritual testing. One of his most famous patients during this period was Commodus, the future emperor and son of Marcus Aurelius. The young man came to Galen not with any serious illness, but with a request that revealed how profoundly Roman attitudes toward medicine had shifted. Commodus wanted to undergo what he called preemptive treatment, medical intervention designed not to cure disease, but to strengthen his constitution against future illness, while providing the kind of character-building ordeal that had so benefited his father. Galen was initially reluctant. Treating a healthy person with methods designed for the seriously ill presented obvious risks, and even his confidence had limits. But Commodus was insistent, and the political implications of refusing the future emperor were considerable. Galen eventually agreed, but only after developing what he considered to be his most sophisticated treatment protocol, yet a systematic program of controlled medical stress designed to strengthen rather than cure. The treatment Galen designed for Commodus lasted for nearly 3 months and involved a carefully orchestrated series of interventions that pushed the boundaries of what the human body could endure. Each week brought new challenges, controlled bloodletting sessions that brought Commodus to the edge of unconsciousness, dietary restrictions that induced carefully monitored malnutrition, and doses of various substances that created controlled toxic reactions followed by precisely timed antidotes. But the most innovative aspect of the treatment involved what Galen called anatomical education, using the knowledge he had gained from his gladiator patients and his extensive animal dissections. He designed procedures that would allow Commodus to observe his own internal functions. Small incisions were made at strategic points, allowing the young man to see his own muscles, tendons, and blood vessels in action. Heated bronze instruments were used to stimulate specific nerves, demonstrating how the body's various systems communicated with each other. These procedures were conducted with Commodus fully conscious, using techniques Galen had developed to minimize pain while maintaining awareness. The future emperor was able to observe his own heartbeat through carefully placed incisions, feel the movement of his own tendons as controlled heat was applied to specific nerves, and even watch the flow of blood through vessels that had been temporarily exposed for educational purposes. The psychological impact of these experiences was profound. Commodus emerged from the treatment with an almost supernatural understanding of his own physical existence, describing sensations and awareness that seemed to transcend normal human experience. He claimed to be able to feel the movement of humors through his body, to sense the approach of illness before any symptoms appeared, and to control various bodily functions through mental discipline alone. But the treatment also left him fundamentally changed in ways that would have troubling implications for his later reign as emperor. Commodus had become convinced that physical pain was not just tolerable, but desirable. It's a source of insight and strength that should be actively sought. He began subjecting himself to increasingly extreme physical challenges, from gladiatorial combat to deliberately dangerous hunting expeditions, always seeking to recreate the intensity of sensation he had experienced during Galen's treatment. More troubling still, Commodus began applying similar principles to others, convinced that the benefits he had experienced could be shared through imposed suffering. His later reputation for cruelty and excess can be traced, at least in part, to his conviction that he was providing others with opportunities for growth and enlightenment through controlled ordeal. The line between medical treatment and torture had become dangerously blurred in his mind, a confusion that would have tragic consequences for the empire. Galen himself began to recognize the problematic implications of his success as his methods spread throughout the Roman medical community. He observed that many physicians were applying his techniques without fully understanding their theoretical foundations. The careful balance between therapeutic benefit and controlled harm that he had spent decades perfecting was being reduced to crude applications of increasingly aggressive treatments. Reports began reaching Galen of patients who had died under treatment by physicians claiming to follow his methods. These weren't simply cases of medical failure. They were instances where the treatment itself had become so extreme that it overwhelmed the patient's ability to survive. Physicians who had learned Galen's techniques secondhand were applying maximum interventions to minimum problems, convinced that more aggressive treatment was always better than less. The situation was complicated by Galen's own writings, which had become increasingly confident and systematic over the years. His medical texts described his methods with such authority and detail that other physicians felt compelled to follow them exactly, even in cases where Galen himself might have modified his approach based on individual circumstances. The art of medical judgment was being replaced by rigid adherence to protocols that had been designed for very specific situations. This medicalization of suffering reached its peak during the Great Plague that struck Rome in 166 AD, just as Galen was reaching the height of his influence. The epidemic, which historians now believe was either smallpox or measles, presented the Roman medical establishment with a crisis that tested every aspect of Galen's theoretical system. Here was a disease that affected thousands of people simultaneously, requiring treatments that could be applied quickly and broadly, rather than tailored to individual constitutions. Galen's response to the plague revealed both the strengths and the limitations of his approach. He correctly identified that the disease was contagious and developed isolation protocols that probably saved many lives. His understanding of anatomy allowed him to recognize and treat some of the complications that killed patients who might otherwise have survived the initial infection. But his insistence on applying his full treatment protocols to plague victims led to interventions that were often more harmful than the disease itself. Plague patients were subjected to the same systematic bloodletting, purging, and toxic preparations that Galen had developed for individual wealthy clients. The reasoning was sound according to his theoretical framework. The plague represented a massive corruption of the humoral balance that required equally massive correction, while patients who were already weakened by fever and disease often couldn't survive the additional stress of comprehensive treatment. The mortality rate among patients treated according to Galen's full protocols was significantly higher than among those who received only basic supportive care. This statistical reality was difficult for Galen to accept, given his absolute confidence in his theoretical understanding. Rather than modifying his approach, he concluded that the plague represented a form of corruption so severe that many patients were simply beyond the reach of any medical intervention. While you endured the ongoing effects of your physician's treatments, archaeologists across the former Roman Empire have been carefully excavating sites that reveal the material reality of ancient medical practice. Their discoveries paint a picture that's both more sophisticated and more disturbing than literary sources alone might suggest. In the silent testimony of bronze instruments, ceramic vessels, and human remains, we find evidence of a medical culture that combined genuine innovation with practices that would challenge the strongest constitution. The most striking archaeological discoveries related to Roman medicine have emerged from sites across the empire, from Britain to Egypt, each location adding pieces to a puzzle that reveals the true scope and nature of ancient medical practice. In 1958, archaeologists working at a Roman fort in Germany uncovered what they initially thought was a blacksmith's workshop. The room contained numerous bronze implements, small furnaces, and what appeared to be metalworking tools. Only careful analysis revealed that they had discovered an intact Roman military medical facility, complete with surgical instruments that had been abandoned during a hasty evacuation nearly 2,000 years earlier. The instruments found at this site were remarkable, both for their sophistication and their obvious capacity to inflict controlled trauma. Bronze scalpels with edges so fine they rivaled modern surgical steel. Forceps designed with intricate mechanisms for grasping and manipulating internal tissues, and probes of various lengths and configurations that spoke to a detailed understanding of human anatomy. But perhaps most telling were the implements that had no obvious modern equivalent, bronze hooks designed for procedures that could only be described as controlled mutilation. Heating devices clearly intended for applying precise amounts of PSE, amounts of thermal trauma, and containers for substances that chemical analysis revealed to be toxic compounds, administered in carefully measured doses. One particularly disturbing discovery was a set of bronze cups identical to those that have left their circular marks on your chest. These cupping vessels were found alongside detailed instructions inscribed on lead tablets, describing precise techniques for their application. The instructions weren't simply medical, they were ritualistic, specifying not just how to apply the cups, but when they should be applied relative to the phases of the moon, what prayers should be recited during the procedure, and how the resulting wounds should be interpreted as signs of the treatment's effectiveness. The lead tablets themselves represent one of the most fascinating aspects of Roman medical archaeology. Unlike the formal medical texts that have survived in literary form, these small inscriptions were apparently working documents used by practicing physicians. They contain abbreviated recipes for treatments, often written in a mixture of Latin and Greek medical terminology that suggests they were personal notes rather than public documents. Many of the tablets are stained with residues that chemical analysis has identified as mercury, lead compounds, and various organic substances that were clearly used in medical preparations. One tablet, discovered in a physician's house in Pompeii, contains a recipe that matches almost exactly the mercury preparation your physician recently administered to you. The inscription, roughly translated, reads, "For deep corruption of the humoral system, mercury of Alexandria, 3 parts, antimony, 1 part, crushed emeralds, half part. Why, blessed by priests of Asclepius, sufficient to dissolve, minister, during the hour of Saturn, when patient's constitution can withstand the transformation. Warning, patient must remain motionless for 2 hours after administration, lest the mercury settle in unintended locations." The warning at the end of this recipe reveals something crucial about Roman medical practice. Physicians were fully aware that their treatments carried significant risks, but they considered those risks acceptable given the severity of the conditions they were treating. The mercury preparation wasn't applied carelessly. It was part of a calculated medical strategy that weighed the danger of the treatment against the danger of allowing disease to progress untreated. Archaeological evidence from Roman burial sites provides even more disturbing insights into the reality of medical treatment. Skeletal remains throughout the empire show evidence of medical interventions that were clearly performed on living patients. Bones display signs of surgical cutting, drilling, scraping that healed during the patient's lifetime, indicating successful completion of procedures that would challenge modern surgical capabilities. But they also show evidence of procedures that were clearly experimental or desperate modifications to skull structure, evidence of internal organs being surgically accessed, and bone modifications that suggest attempts to treat conditions through direct physical alteration of skeletal structure. Perhaps most remarkably, many of these surgical sites show evidence of healing, indicating that patients survived procedures that seem almost impossibly traumatic. Roman physicians had clearly developed techniques for surgical intervention that went far beyond what their literary descriptions might suggest. The skeleton of a Roman soldier found in Britain shows evidence of a skull surgery that removed a significant portion of the cranium. Yet, the bone had completely healed, suggesting the soldier lived 4 years after the procedure. But the archaeological record also reveals the failures. Burial sites throughout the empire contain skeletons showing evidence of medical procedures that clearly didn't end well. Bones fractured during treatment and never properly healed, evidence of surgical sites that became infected. School and remains showing signs of systematic damage that could only have resulted from prolonged medical intervention. These cases provide a sobering counterpoint to the success stories, revealing that Roman medical practice operated with a casualty rate that would be considered unacceptable by any modern standard. The most intriguing archaeological discoveries relate to the non-medical aspects of Roman healing practices. Excavations at temple sites dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, have revealed extensive facilities that combined religious ritual with medical treatment. These weren't simply temples where people prayed for healing. They were functioning medical complexes where priests and physicians worked together to provide integrated spiritual and physical treatment. At the great healing complex of Epidaurus in Greece, which served as a model for similar facilities throughout the Roman Empire, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a systematic approach to healing that combined elements we would recognize as medical with others that seem purely ritualistic. The complex included dormitories where patients slept while undergoing treatment, bathing facilities designed for specific therapeutic purposes, and treatment rooms equipped with sophisticated medical instruments alongside religious artifacts. But perhaps most revealing are the votive offerings left by patients' small bronze and clay models of body parts that had been successfully treated. These offerings provide a catalog of the conditions Roman medicine was expected to address: limbs that had been broken and healed, internal organs that had been restored to function, and even models of heads and faces that suggest successful treatment of conditions affecting mental function or facial appearance. The votive offerings also reveal something darker about Roman medical expectations. Many of the models show evidence of the treatments themselves: miniature bronze legs bearing the circular marks of cupping, clay torsos displaying the scars of surgical intervention, and small metal heads with holes that clearly represent surgical procedures. Patients weren't just giving thanks for being healed. They were commemorating their survival of the healing process itself. Chemical analysis of residues found in Roman medical facilities has provided insights into the substances that physicians actually used, as opposed to what they claimed to use in their written works. Containers discovered at medical sites throughout the empire show traces of mercury, lead, arsenic, and various plant alkaloids that are known to be highly toxic. But they also show evidence of sophisticated attempts to modify these substances to reduce their toxicity while preserving their therapeutic effects. One particularly interesting discovery was made at a Roman medical facility in Egypt, where archaeologists found a series of ceramic vessels containing residues of what appeared to be experimental preparations. Chemical analysis revealed that Roman physicians had been systematically testing different combinations of toxic substances, apparently trying to develop preparations that would be effective against disease while remaining survivable for patients. The evidence suggests a level of systematic experimentation that rivals modern pharmaceutical research, albeit with very different safety standards. The most haunting archaeological discoveries related to Roman medicine aren't the bronze instruments or ceramic vessels filled with mysterious preparations. They're the human remains that tell stories of medical encounters that ended in ways both remarkable and disturbing. Across the former Roman Empire, archaeologists have uncovered skeletons that bear witness to medical procedures so extensive and invasive that they challenge our understanding of what the human body can endure and still survive. Silent, patients speak to us across nearly 2 millennia, their bones telling stories of healing and horror that no written account could convey with such stark honesty. In 1987, archaeologists working at a Roman cemetery in southern France made a discovery that would fundamentally alter our understanding of ancient surgical capabilities. The skeleton of a middle-aged man, buried with honors suggesting significant social status, displayed evidence of medical interventions so extensive that researchers initially suspected the remains had been disturbed or contaminated. Careful analysis, however, revealed that every marking on the bones had occurred during the man's lifetime and had healed completely, indicating not just survival, but years of life following procedures that would challenge modern surgical techniques. The man's skull showed evidence of at least 3 separate surgical interventions. One involved a careful removal of a section of cranium about the size of a modern coin, with tool marks indicating the use of bronze instruments to cut through bone while avoiding damage to the underlying brain tissue. The removed section had been replaced and had reattached so completely that only careful examination revealed the surgery had taken place. More remarkably, the surrounding bone showed no signs of infection, suggesting that Roman surgeons had developed techniques for maintaining sterile conditions during procedures that exposed the brain to external environment. But the skull surgery was only the beginning of this patient's medical history. His ribs showed evidence of systematic cutting and repositioning, apparently to provide access to internal organs. Several ribs had been carefully severed, moved aside during the procedure, and then reattached using techniques that allowed them to heal in their new positions. The precision of the cuts and the evidence of successful healing suggested that Roman physicians had developed methods for opening the chest cavity and performing internal procedures while keeping the patient alive throughout the process. Perhaps most remarkably, the man's spine showed evidence of surgical intervention at multiple levels. Vertebrae had been carefully modified, apparently to relieve pressure on spinal nerves, with tool marks indicating procedures so precise that they would challenge modern neurosurgical capabilities. The fact that these interventions had healed successfully with no evidence of paralysis or other complications suggested that Roman physicians possessed an understanding of spinal anatomy that was far more sophisticated than their written works indicated. Chemical analysis of the bones revealed additional insights into this patient's medical history. Traces of mercury, lead, and various organic compounds were embedded in the bone matrix, indicating that he had been subjected to the same kinds of systematic poisoning that you're currently experiencing. But the concentrations found suggested that he had survived multiple courses of such treatment over a period of years, his body somehow adapting to levels of toxic exposure that should have been fatal. This single skeleton revolutionized archaeological understanding of Roman medical capabilities, but also raised disturbing questions about the selection criteria for such extensive treatment. Not every Roman patient received care at this level. The evidence suggests that these procedures were reserved for individuals of exceptional importance, or for cases that served some experimental purpose beyond simple healing. Subsequent discoveries at sites throughout the empire have revealed similar patterns. In Britain, the skeleton of a Roman woman showed evidence of surgical procedures that had successfully corrected a severely displaced fracture of her pelvis, a type of injury that would have been considered untreatable until very recently. The bones showed that Roman surgeons had systematically repositioned multiple bone fragments and secured them in place, using bronze, pins, and wires that became integrated into the healing bone structure. But this woman's remains also told a darker story. Her other bones showed evidence of multiple medical procedures that appeared to have no therapeutic purpose. Small holes had been drilled into various bones, apparently for experimental purposes, and sections of rib and arm bones had been removed and replaced with what appeared to be bone grafts from other sources. The evidence suggested that she had served as a long-term subject for medical experimentation, surviving procedures that were clearly designed to test surgical techniques rather than address specific medical problems. The most disturbing discoveries have come from Roman military sites, where archaeologists have uncovered evidence of systematic medical experimentation on soldiers and gladiators. At a fort in Germany, excavations revealed a burial ground containing the remains of dozens of individuals who had clearly been subjected to extensive medical procedures. The patterns of intervention were too systematic to represent normal medical treatment. They appeared to document a research program designed to understand the limits of human surgical tolerance. Some of these remains showed evidence of procedures that could only be described as controlled dismemberment and reassembly. Limbs had been systematically removed and reattached, apparently to test techniques for treating battlefield amputations. The bone evidence suggested that Roman military physicians had developed methods for severing and reattaching major limbs while maintaining blood flow and nerve function, techniques that wouldn't be redeveloped until the 20th century. But perhaps most chilling were the skulls that showed evidence of systematic brain surgery. Multiple individuals had undergone procedures that involved removing sections of skull and directly manipulating brain tissue. The tool marks on the bones indicated procedures of extraordinary precision, with evidence that surgeons had been able to work on specific areas of the brain while avoiding damage to surrounding tissue. Some of these patients had clearly survived 4 years after such procedures, their skulls showing complete healing around the surgical sites. The purpose of these brain surgeries remains a mystery that haunts researchers. Some appear to have been attempts to treat head injuries, but others showed no evidence of prior trauma or disease. The systematic nature of the interventions suggests that Roman physicians were conducting research into brain function, possibly attempting to understand the relationship between specific brain areas and various aspects of human behavior and capability. Chemical analysis of these remains has revealed additional disturbing details. Many of the skulls that showed evidence of brain surgery also contained high concentrations of mercury and other toxic substances, suggesting that patients had been subjected to chemical as well as surgical experimentation. The combination of direct brain manipulation with systematic poisoning paints is a picture of medical research that pushed ethical boundaries in ways that would be inconceivable in a modern context. Archaeological evidence from Roman healing temples provides additional insights into the human cost of ancient medical practice. At the Temple of Asclepius at Epidaurus, excavations have uncovered burial sites containing the remains of patients who clearly died during treatment. These weren't simply cases of medical failure. The bone evidence suggests that many of these individuals died during procedures that were known to be extremely dangerous, but were attempted anyway. One particularly poignant discovery was the skeleton of a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, who had been brought to the temple with what appeared to be a spinal deformity. The bones showed evidence of an attempted surgical correction that involved systematically breaking and repositioning multiple vertebrae. The procedure had clearly been planned and executed with great care, but the girl had died during the operation, her remains showing evidence of massive bleeding that the surgeons had been unable to control. Beyond the bronze instruments and human remains lies another layer of Roman medical practice that archaeologists have only recently begun to understand: the profound integration of religious ritual with medical treatment. Excavations at healing sites throughout the empire have revealed that Roman medicine wasn't simply a matter of applying physical treatments to physical problems. It was a complex ritual process that engaged spiritual, psychological, and social dimensions of healing in ways that modern medicine has largely abandoned. The archaeological evidence suggests that your current medical ordeal is as much a religious experience as a medical one, part of a systematic approach to healing that viewed illness as a disruption of cosmic order that could only be restored through carefully orchestrated ritual intervention. The most remarkable discoveries in this area have come from the Great Healing Complex at Bath in Britain, where Roman engineers channeled natural hot springs into an elaborate medical facility that combined hydrotherapy with religious ceremony. Recent excavations at the site have revealed that the complex was far more sophisticated than previously understood, incorporating elements that suggest a systematic approach to healing that addressed not just physical symptoms, but the entire spiritual and social context of illness. The centerpiece of the bath complex was the sacred pool, fed by springs that the Romans believed were directly connected to the divine realm. but archaeological evidence reveals that the pool wasn't simply a place for bathing, okay? It was the focal point of an elaborate ritual process that could extend for weeks or even months. Patients didn't just enter the water. They underwent a systematic preparation that began long before they ever touched the sacred springs. Excavations around the pool have uncovered a series of preparation chambers where patients underwent what can only be described as ritual purification. These rooms contained specialized bathing facilities designed for specific types of cleansing. Altars where patients made offerings to various healing deities, and even small cells where individuals could undergo periods of isolation and fasting, designed to prepare them spiritually for the healing process. The offerings found in these preparation chambers provide insights into the mental state of patients approaching Roman medical treatment. Thousands of small bronze and lead tablets have been discovered, inscribed with prayers and promises that revealed the deep anxiety and desperate hope that accompanied medical intervention. Many of these tablets describe symptoms in detail, but they also reveal the extent to which patients understood their illness in spiritual terms. One tablet, discovered in a chamber adjacent to the sacred pool, contains a prayer that perfectly captures the mindset of a Roman patient. Divine Minerva, goddess of healing wisdom, I come before you bearing a corruption of the blood that has resisted all earthly treatment. I have endured the bronze instruments. I have survived the purging medicines. I have submitted to the physician's wisdom, yet still the fever burns within me. I offer you my suffering as proof of my dedication, and I beg you to accept this ordeal as worthy sacrifice for the restoration of my health. The language of this prayer reveals something crucial about Roman medical culture. Patients didn't simply hope to be healed. They expected to earn healing through endurance of specifically designed ordeals. The medical treatments you've undergone aren't just attempts to cure your fever. They're offerings to the healing deities, demonstrations of your worthiness to receive divine intervention. Archaeological evidence from the bath complex reveals that this ritual dimension of healing was systematically integrated with medical treatment. Patients who survived the initial medical interventions were then guided through increasingly elaborate religious ceremonies designed to secure divine approval for their recovery. These ceremonies often lasted for days, involving complex sequences of ritual bathing, dietary restrictions, and ceremonial applications of various substances that had both medical and religious significance. The most fascinating aspect of these healing rituals was their use of what archaeologists have termed sacred suffering. Patients were subjected to deliberately uncomfortable experiences that had no obvious medical purpose, but were designed to demonstrate their commitment to the healing process. These might include prolonged exposure to extreme heat or cold, consumption of substances that were intentionally unpleasant but not medically harmful, or participation in ceremonies that required significant physical endurance. Evidence for these practices has been found at healing sites throughout the empire. At the Temple of Asclepius, at Pergamon, Galen's birthplace, its excavations have revealed chambers specifically designed for ritual suffering. These rooms contained apparatus for applying controlled heat, cold, and pressure to patients' bodies, apparently as part of religious ceremonies rather than medical treatment. The devices were often decorated with religious symbols and inscriptions that made clear their ceremonial rather than purely medical purpose. But perhaps the most intriguing archaeological discoveries relate to the use of sacred substances in Roman healing rituals. Chemical analysis of residues found at religious healing sites has revealed that patients were often given preparations that contained psychoactive compounds capable of producing profound alterations in consciousness. These substances weren't simply medicine, they were tools for inducing religious experiences that were considered essential to the healing process. At a temple complex in Egypt, archaeologists discovered a series of vessels containing residues of preparations that included opium, various plant alkaloids, and even compounds derived from certain types of mushrooms known to produce hallucinogenic effects. Inscriptions found at the site make clear that these substances were administered to patients as part of elaborate ceremonies designed to allow them to commune directly with healing deities. The descriptions of these reconduced religious experiences, preserved in votive offerings left by patients, provide remarkable insights into the psychological dimension of Roman healing. Patients reported visions in which healing deities appeared to them and provided specific instructions for treatment. Dreams in which they observed their own bodies being repaired by divine intervention, and mystical experiences that convinced them of their eventual recovery. But the archaeological evidence also reveals the dangers inherent in this combination of medicine and religious ecstasy. Several burial sites associated with healing temples contain remains of patients who clearly died during these drug-induced ceremonies. Chemical analysis of their bones reveals concentrations of psychoactive substances that would have been toxic, suggesting that the line between therapeutic and lethal doses was not always successfully maintained. The integration of religious ritual with medical treatment also extended to the interpretation of treatment outcomes. Archaeological evidence suggests that Roman physicians and patients collaborated to find religious meaning in every aspect of the healing process, including complications and failures. Sites throughout the empire have yielded votive offerings that give thanks not just for successful treatment, but for survival of particularly difficult ordeals. One remarkable discovery was made at a healing shrine in Spain, where archaeologists found a bronze plaque inscribed with a detailed account of a patient's medical experience. The inscription describes treatments that would be familiar to you: cupping, purging, administration of toxic substances, but frames them entirely in religious terms. The patient describes each ordeal as a test imposed by the healing deities and expresses gratitude not just for eventual recovery, but for having been found worthy of such challenging treatment. This religious interpretation of medical suffering helps explain why Roman patients were willing to endure treatments that seem almost impossibly difficult. They weren't simply submitting to medical procedures. They were participating in religious rituals that promised not just physical healing, but spiritual transformation. The mercury coursing through your system isn't just medicine. It's a sacred substance that connects you to divine healing power, and your ability to tolerate its effects demonstrates your worthiness to receive that power. Archaeological evidence from burial sites associated with healing temples reveals another dimension of this religious approach to medicine: the belief that patients who died during treatment had achieved a form of spiritual transformation that was valuable in its own right. These individuals were often buried with special honors, and their graves were marked with inscriptions that described them not as medical failures, but as martyrs to the healing process. While you endure your systematic medical ordeal in a modest Roman apartment with bronze instruments that carry the stains of previous patients and medicines mixed in vessels that have never been properly cleaned, imagine for a moment what the same fever might mean if you belonged to the Roman elite. The wealthy and powerful of the empire experienced illness and treatment in ways that were both luxurious and terrifying, receiving medical attention that was more elaborate, more experimental, and ultimately more dangerous than anything available to ordinary citizens. Understanding how the elite experienced Roman medicine reveals not just the privileges of wealth, but the peculiar ways in which luxury could make medical treatment even more perilous than it was for common patients. The Emperor Hadrian's final illness, which lasted nearly 4 years before his death in 138 AD, provides a perfect example of how imperial medicine transformed suffering into spectacle. Unlike your private ordeal, Hadrian's medical treatment became a matter of state, but the empire's finest physicians competing to demonstrate their skills on the most important patient in the world. What should have been a medical matter became a political and social event that revealed both the possibilities and the perils of elite medical care. Hadrian's illness began with symptoms that would be familiar to you: persistent fever, weakness, and digestive problems that resisted conventional treatment. But where your physician works alone, applying standard Galenic protocols with modest equipment, Hadrian's condition attracted a veritable army of medical specialists. The imperial court summoned physicians from across the empire, Greek theorists from Alexandria, specialists in exotic medicines from Syria, surgical experts who had trained with gladiators, and even practitioners of Egyptian and Persian medical arts that were normally considered too foreign for Roman acceptance. The competition among these physicians to treat the emperor created a medical environment that was simultaneously more sophisticated and more dangerous than anything available to ordinary patients. Each physician sought to demonstrate his superiority by proposing treatments that were more innovative, more aggressive, and more theoretically complex than those suggested by his rivals. What began as attempts to cure the emperor's relatively straightforward symptoms evolved into a series of medical experiments that pushed the boundaries of what the human body could endure. The imperial physicians had access to medical resources that were simply unavailable to practitioners treating ordinary patients. Where your physician uses standard bronze instruments that have been passed down through generations of medical practice, Hadrian's doctors commissioned new surgical tools made from the finest metals, crafted by the empire's most skilled artisans. These instruments were not just functional, but beautiful, decorated with precious stones and inscriptions that marked them as worthy of imperial use. But more significantly, the imperial physicians had access to substances and preparations that were far more exotic and dangerous than anything available to common practitioners. Hadrian's treatments included medicines imported from the far reaches of the empire and beyond, rare plants from India that were believed to possess extraordinary healing properties, minerals from distant mountains that were thought to contain concentrated cosmic energy, and preparations that included materials so precious they were normally reserved for religious ceremonies. One of the most elaborate treatments applied to Hadrian involved what his physicians called imperial bloodletting, a procedure that was far more complex and dangerous than the simple bloodletting that might be applied to ordinary patients. Instead of simply opening a vein and allowing blood to flow, the imperial physicians developed a systematic approach that involved drawing blood from multiple locations simultaneously while maintaining precise control over the amount and timing of blood loss. The procedure required a team of physicians working in coordination, each responsible for monitoring different aspects of the emperor's condition during the bloodletting. One physician monitored pulse and breathing, another observed changes in skin color and temperature, while a third carefully measured the blood being drawn to ensure that the precise amount specified by theoretical calculations was removed. The complexity of the procedure meant that any small error in coordination could be fatal, but it also represented the most advanced bloodletting techniques available in the ancient world. Even more elaborate was the series of imperial purging treatments that Hadrian endured during the second year of his illness. These went far beyond the simple administration of purgative medicines that ordinary patients might receive. Instead, the emperor's physicians developed a systematic approach that involved multiple types of purging applied in precise sequences, with each stage carefully monitored and adjusted based on the patient's response. The imperial purging protocols included not just the standard use of hellebore and other traditional purgatives, but also the application of exotic substances that were available only to the imperial court. Hadrian was given preparations that included ground pearls from the Persian Gulf, designed to provide cooling purification, extracts from rare plants found only in the mountains of Parthia, believed to possess the power to drive corruption from the deepest parts of the body, and even preparations that included gold leaf, based on theories that the incorruptible nature of gold could transfer its properties to the patient's internal humors. But perhaps the most striking difference between imperial and ordinary medical care was the integration of what court physicians called cosmic synchronization into treatment protocols. Hadrian's physicians didn't simply apply treatments when medical theory suggested they would be most effective. They coordinated medical interventions with astronomical events, meteorological calculations, and even imperial ceremonies that were believed to enhance the healing power of medical procedures. The emperor's treatment schedule was coordinated with the phases of the moon, positions of the planets, and even the timing of important state events. Major medical procedures were scheduled to coincide with religious festivals that honored healing deities, while daily treatments were timed to coincide with the emperor's personal astrological chart. This meant that medical decisions were often delayed or accelerated based on cosmic considerations rather than purely medical factors, adding layers of complexity and potential danger to an already risky treatment regimen. The imperial medical facilities where Hadrian received treatment were themselves marvels of luxury and sophistication that transformed the experience of illness into something resembling a religious retreat. Instead of being treated in his personal chambers, the emperor was moved to specially constructed medical pavilions that combined the finest architectural design with the most advanced medical equipment available in the ancient world. These medical pavilions were designed not just for functionality, but for psychological effect. The rooms where treatments were administered were decorated with artwork depicting successful healing miracles, scribed with quotations from medical authorities, and furnished with objects that were believed to possess healing properties in their own right. Patients approaching treatment in these environments were surrounded by visual and symbolic reminders of medical success, creating an atmosphere of confidence and expectation that was intended to enhance the effectiveness of treatment. But the luxury of imperial medical facilities also created opportunities for treatments that would have been impossible in more modest settings. The pavilions included specialized rooms for different types of medical procedures, chambers designed for controlled heating and cooling of patients, rooms equipped with apparatus for applying precise amounts of pressure to different parts of the body, and even facilities for creating controlled atmospheric conditions that were believed to enhance the effectiveness of certain medicines. One of the most remarkable features of Hadrian's medical pavilions was a room designed specifically for imperial cupping, a procedure that took the standard cupping techniques you've experienced and elevated them to a level of complexity that bordered on the theatrical. Instead of simple bronze cups heated over small flames, the imperial physicians used elaborate cupping apparatus made from precious metals and decorated with jewels that were believed to enhance their healing properties. The contrast between your modest medical ordeal and the elaborate treatments available to the Roman elite becomes even more stark when we consider the medical experiences of the imperial women, whose illnesses were treated not just as medical problems, but as affairs of state that demanded the most sophisticated and experimental interventions available. The Empress Faustina the Younger, wife of Marcus Aurelius, endured a medical treatment for what appeared to be a simple digestive ailment that transformed healing into a form of luxurious torture that lasted nearly a year and involved medical procedures so elaborate they required their own dedicated staff and facilities. Faustina's illness began, like yours, with seemingly straightforward symptoms: persistent nausea, loss of appetite, and general weakness that suggested a simple imbalance of the humors. But unlike your treatment, which involves a single physician working with basic equipment, Faustina's condition attracted the attention of every medical specialist in the empire. Her status as empress meant that her illness became a competitive exhibition where physicians sought to demonstrate their skills through increasingly elaborate and dangerous interventions. The medical team assembled to treat Faustina included not just physicians, but an entire support staff of specialists whose sole purpose was to transform medical treatment into an experience worthy of imperial luxury. There were perfumers who specialized in creating aromatic environments for healing, massage therapists trained in techniques that were believed to redirect the flow of humors through the body, and even musicians whose compositions were specifically designed to promote healing through carefully calculated acoustic effects. But perhaps most significantly, Faustina's medical team included specialists in what was called imperial bathing therapy, a form of treatment that took the basic Roman practice of therapeutic bathing and elevated it to a level of complexity that bordered on the absurd. The Empress's bathing treatments involved not just immersion in water, but exposure to carefully controlled sequences of different temperatures, mineral compositions, and aromatic additives that were believed to address specific aspects of her condition. The bathing complex constructed for Faustina's treatment was a marvel of engineering and luxury that rivaled the great public baths of Rome itself. Multiple pools were connected by an elaborate system of channels and chambers that allowed for precise control of water temperature, mineral content, and even the timing of the Empress's exposure to different therapeutic environments. Each pool contained water that had been specially prepared according to theoretical principles that combined medical knowledge with imperial preferences for luxury and novelty. The first stage of Faustina's bathing treatment involved what her physicians called preparatory purification, a sequence of baths designed to remove not just physical corruption, but spiritual contamination that might interfere with more advanced treatments. The Empress was immersed in waters that had been infused with preparations imported from across the empire, salts from the Dead Sea that were believed to draw corruption from the deepest levels of the body, mineral preparations from volcanic springs in Sicily that were thought to possess purifying fire, and even water that had been blessed by priests of various healing deities. But the purification baths were only the beginning of a treatment protocol that grew increasingly elaborate and dangerous as Faustina's physicians competed to demonstrate their sophistication. The second stage involved therapeutic shock, rapid alternation between pools of different temperatures that was designed to stimulate the body's natural healing responses. Faustina was moved quickly between pools of near-freezing water and pools heated to temperatures that were barely tolerable, with the timing and duration of each exposure calculated according to complex theoretical formulas. The thermal shock treatments were accompanied by systematic application of various substances to the Empress's skin while she was immersed in the differently heated pools. In the cold pools, her body was rubbed with preparations that contained ground pearls and other cooling substances that were believed to protect her from the harmful effects of extreme cold. In the hot pools, she was treated with oils and unguents that contained heating elements designed to enhance the warming effects of the water while protecting her skin from damage. These thermal treatments were not simply uncomfortable. They were systematically designed to push the human body to its limits of temperature tolerance. Faustina's physicians had developed theoretical frameworks that suggested the body's healing mechanisms could only be activated by exposing patients to environmental extremes that forced their systems to mobilize all available resources for survival. The Empress was essentially being subjected to controlled near-death experiences in the name of medical treatment. Even more elaborate were the immersion purging treatments that combined the bathing protocols with systematic administration of medicines designed to cleanse the body from within while the external purification was taking place. Faustina was given carefully timed doses of various purgative preparations while immersed in baths that were believed to enhance the effectiveness of the medicines through thermal and mineral effects on the skin and respiratory system. These combined treatments created medical ordeals that lasted for hours at a time and required constant monitoring by teams of physicians and assistants. The Empress could not simply relax in therapeutic baths. She was subjected to carefully orchestrated sequences of environmental stress, chemical purging, and physical manipulation that transformed bathing from a luxury into a form of systematic torture disguised as sophisticated care. The psychological effects of these treatments were as significant as the physical ones. Faustina's physicians had developed theories about the relationship between mental state and healing that led them to design treatments specifically intended to induce particular emotional and psychological responses. The Empress was subjected to sensory experiences that were designed to overwhelm her normal psychological defenses and create states of vulnerability that were believed to enhance the effectiveness of medical intervention. Some of the bathing treatments included controlled sensory deprivation immersion in pools that were kept in complete darkness, while aromatic substances that had mild psychoactive effects were dissolved in the water. Faustina would spend hours in these environments, unable to see or hear clearly, while her body processed both the physical effects of the bathing treatment and the mental effects of the aromatic preparations. Other treatments involved controlled sensory overload exposure to carefully orchestrated combinations of extreme temperatures, intense aromatics, and acoustic effects that were designed to overwhelm the Empress's sensory systems and induce altered states of consciousness that were believed to be conducive to healing. These treatments combined the worst aspects of modern sensory torture with the theoretical frameworks of ancient medicine. The ultimate paradox of Roman elite medicine reveals itself most clearly in the case of Emperor Commodus, whose access to unlimited medical resources transformed what should have been routine healthcare into a series of increasingly dangerous experiments that ultimately contributed to his psychological deterioration and violent death. Unlike your straightforward treatment for fever, Commodus experienced medicine as a form of competitive entertainment where physicians vied to demonstrate their skills through increasingly elaborate and dangerous procedures. His medical history illustrates how wealth and power, rather than protecting patients from the dangers of Roman medicine, actually amplified those dangers by removing all practical constraints on medical experimentation. Commodus, single quotes, as relationship with medicine began in childhood when his status as heir to the throne made his health a matter of imperial policy. Unlike ordinary Roman children, who might receive medical attention only when seriously ill, Commodus was subjected to preventive medical interventions designed to ensure his fitness for eventual rule. These prophylactic treatments established patterns of medical intervention that would dominate his entire life and ultimately contribute to the psychological instability that characterized his reign as emperor. The preventive medicine practiced on young Commodus involved regular applications of procedures that were considered beneficial for maintaining optimum health rather than treating specific illnesses. He was subjected to monthly bloodletting sessions designed to prevent the accumulation of corrupted humors, regular purging treatments intended to maintain digestive purity, and systematic applications of various strengthening preparations that were believed to enhance physical and mental resilience. But perhaps most significantly, Commodus was enrolled in what court physicians called constitutional enhancement, a systematic program of medical interventions designed to improve his natural capabilities beyond what genetics alone had provided. This program involved regular administration of substances that were believed to enhance strength, intelligence, and imperial charisma through direct modification of the body's fundamental humoral balance. The constitutional enhancement treatments included regular doses of preparations that contained gold, believing that the incorruptible nature of precious metals could be transferred to the human body through systematic consumption. Commodus was given gold-based medicines several times each week throughout his childhood and adolescence, gradually building up concentrations of metal in his system that were designed to make him literally more valuable and less susceptible to corruption. But the gold treatments were only the beginning of an enhancement program that grew increasingly elaborate as Commodus matured. His physicians developed specialized preparations that included ground pearls for mental clarity, powdered diamonds for physical strength, and even preparations that contained materials from the emperor's personal treasury, emeralds, sapphires, and other precious stones that were ground into powders and administered as medicines. The psychological effects of these enhancement treatments were profound and troubling. Commodus grew grew up believing that his body contained literal treasures. That made him fundamentally different from ordinary humans. He developed an obsession with physical transformation and improvement that led him to seek increasingly extreme medical interventions throughout his adult life. As emperor, Commodus had access to medical resources that were unprecedented, even by imperial standards. He established what he called experimental medicine facilities, where physicians from across the known world competed to develop new treatments that would enhance his already superhuman capabilities. These facilities became laboratories for medical procedures that pushed the boundaries of what the human body could survive. One of the most elaborate projects undertaken at Commodus's medical facilities was the development of what court physicians called imperial transformation therapy, a systematic program designed to enhance the emperor's physical capabilities through medical modification of his body's fundamental structure. This program involved surgical procedures that were intended to improve muscle function, bone density, and even sensory capabilities through direct intervention in the body's anatomical organization. The transformation therapy included surgical modifications to Commodus's skeletal system that were designed to increase his physical strength and endurance. Bones were reinforced with metal supports. Joints were modified to improve range of motion, and muscle attachments were surgically altered to enhance leverage and power. These procedures were performed by teams of physicians working in coordination, using techniques that had been developed through experimentation on gladiators and other test subjects. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Commodus's transformation therapy was the systematic modification of his nervous system through surgical procedures that were designed to enhance his reflexes and sensory capabilities. Court physicians had developed techniques for accessing and manipulating specific nerves without causing permanent damage, allowing them to theoretically improve the emperor's coordination, reaction time, and even his ability to perceive danger. These nervous system modifications involved procedures that were essentially experimental neurosurgery performed without any understanding of brain function beyond what could be observed through direct manipulation of living tissue. Commodus was subjected to operations that involved careful cutting and repositioning of specific nerves, always with the goal of enhancing rather than simply treating his natural capabilities. The emperor's physicians also developed what they called imperial pharmacology, systematic administration of drug preparations that were designed to enhance psychological and mental capabilities rather than simply treating illness. Commodus was given regular doses of preparations that contained psychoactive substances imported from across the empire, with each drug carefully selected and combined to produce specific mental effects. Some of these pharmacological preparations were designed to enhance aggression and physical courage, containing stimulants and other substances that were believed to increase the emperor's effectiveness in combat situations. Others were intended to improve mental clarity and decision-making ability, including compounds that modern analysis would recognize as having significant effects on brain chemistry and cognitive function. But the most dangerous aspect of Commodus's pharmaceutical regimen was the systematic administration of what court physicians called God-making medicines, preparations that were designed to induce religious and mystical experiences that would enhance the emperor's sense of divine authority. These preparations included powerful hallucinogens and other psychoactive substances that were administered in controlled settings, designed to produce specific types of spiritual experiences. The God-making medicines were administered in special chambers that had been designed to enhance their psychological effects through controlled environmental manipulation. Commodus would be given these preparations while surrounded by artwork, music, and aromatic effects that were specifically chosen to guide his drug-induced experiences toward particular themes and conclusions. The cumulative effect of these pharmaceutical interventions was to create an emperor whose consciousness had been systematically altered through years of exposure to mind-altering substances. Commodus's later behavior, his obsession with gladiatorial combat, his belief in his own divinity, his increasingly erratic and violent decision-making could be traced directly to the effects of medical treatments that were designed to enhance his capabilities but actually damaged his psychological stability. The most tragic aspect of Commodus's medical history was the way in which his physicians interpreted the obvious signs of psychological deterioration as evidence of successful enhancement. When the emperor began showing signs of mental instability, his doctors concluded that his consciousness was being elevated beyond normal human limitations. When he became increasingly violent and unpredictable, they interpreted this as evidence of enhanced imperial authority and divine connection. As our journey through the shadowed corridors of Roman medicine draws to a close, you find yourself back in your modest chamber, still feeling the lingering effects of treatments that have tested every limit of your endurance. The fever that brought you to this point, that simple disruption of your body's natural harmony, has become the gateway to an experience that has transformed not just your health, but your entire understanding of what it means to seek healing. In the ancient world, the mercury continues its mysterious work in your system, creating sensations that seem to bridge the gap between medicine and alchemy, between healing and transformation. The circular marks left by the bronze cups have become permanent reminders of your encounter with Roman medical practice, badges of survival that will remain with you long after the fever itself has become a memory. The various substances you've consumed, the procedures you've endured, the systematic progression from gentle interventions to increasingly aggressive treatments, all of these have initiated you into a tradition of healing that demanded not just patience, but courage, not just hope, but endurance. Through your ordeal, you've experienced firsthand the legacy of Galen's revolutionary approach to medicine, feeling in your own body the effects of theories that would dominate medical practice for over 1,000 years. You've become part of an archaeological record that future scholars will study to understand how ancient peoples approached the fundamental challenge of healing, contributing your own story to the silent testimony of countless patients who endured similar ordeals in pursuit of health. You've also glimpsed through the stories of emperors and empresses how wealth and power could transform healing into something even more challenging than what ordinary patients experienced. The knowledge that imperial medicine was often more dangerous than common treatment provides an odd comfort, revealing that your relatively straightforward ordeal represents a form of medical mercy that was unavailable to those who could afford the most elaborate care. The religious dimensions of your treatment, the ritual aspects that transformed medicine into a sacred process, have connected you to cosmic forces that extend far beyond the simple correction of humoral imbalance. You've participated in ceremonies that honor suffering as a pathway to understanding, that treat endurance as a form of worship, and that view healing as a collaboration between human skill and divine intervention. Most importantly, you've survived. Whether your fever breaks tonight or requires additional intervention, you've proven your capacity to endure treatments that would have been unthinkable to someone living in a different era. You've demonstrated the remarkable resilience of the human body and spirit when faced with ordeals that test the very foundations of existence. As you rest now in the quiet darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the city, settling into sleep, you can find comfort in the knowledge that you've traveled as far from your normal existence as it's possible to go while still remaining in your own body. You've experienced medicine as our ancestors knew it, not as a gentle restoration of comfort, but as a transformative ordeal that demanded everything you had to give. The simple absence of pain, when it finally comes, will feel like a miracle. The return of normal sensation, the gradual fading of the mercury's strange effects, the healing of the cut marks on your chest, all of these will represent not just recovery, but rebirth. You'll emerge from this experience with a profound appreciation for the basic functions of a healthy body, and with the knowledge that you've survived something that would have challenged the strongest constitution. Sleep now, if you can, and let the treatments complete their mysterious work. Whether they cure your fever through the medical mechanisms that Galen believed he understood, or simply allow your body's natural healing processes to reassert themselves, the outcome will be the same. You'll have survived an encounter with Roman medicine, and that survival itself is a form of victory that connects you to the long tradition of patients who endured similar ordeals and lived to tell the tale. Rest easy in the knowledge that tomorrow's dawn will find you still breathing, still thinking, still fundamentally yourself, despite everything your body has been asked to endure. You've learned that healing is never simple and never comfortable, but also that human beings are capable of surviving experiences that seem designed to test the very limits of what flesh, spirit can bear. In your dreams tonight, if the Mercury allows you dreams, you'll join the countless patients who found meaning in their suffering, strength in their endurance, and ultimately peace in the knowledge that they had given everything required of them and emerged intact on the other side. Welcome to the ancient fraternity of survivors, those who know that sometimes the cure is indeed worse than the disease, but who chose to endure both rather than surrender to either.